Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a story of gods, feathers, eggs, and the ancient drama that somehow keeps resurfacing in poetry, paintings, and very weird dinner party conversations. You're lying in bed, of course, but your imagination is about to stroll through clouds and temples, past whispering olive trees and into the golden halls of Mount Olympus itself. Up there, in the highest realm of the sky, things are a bit unpredictable. Lightning simmers quietly in the distance.
Ambrosia is spilled on marble floors, and at the center of it all,
Zeus, king of the gods, the eternal authority on thunder, and a man with a shape-shifting habit that would confuse even the best catfish investigator. You're going to meet him as he prepares one of his more infamous escapades. Spoiler, it involves
feathers, lots of feathers. Now you probably won't survive this story, not because it's dangerous, but because it's long, confusing, and full of contradictions.
And yet, that's what makes it the perfect bedtime myth, a tale that meanders just enough to soothe your brain into a pleasant fog of, wait, did she lay an egg? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling friendly, drop your location and the local time in the comments. It's always fun seeing where we all drift off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're floating just above Mount Olympus now. The air is oddly warm, humming with something electric, as if the mountain itself is a living creature. Silver mist coils around massive pillars carved with ancient script. Above you, a deep rumble rolls, no thunder, just Zeus clearing his throat. Classic. He's seated on a throne that glows faintly from within, lightning bolts stacked like umbrellas beside him. His beard is perfectly curled, his muscles unnecessarily defined for someone who probably doesn't lift anything heavier than a goblet. He's watching the world below, eyes narrowed at something or someone in the mortal realm. You lean closer, peering over his massive shoulder. There's a woman walking through a garden down in Sparta. She's elegant, regal, slightly annoyed at everything, and completely unaware she's about to become the central figure in one of mythology's most confusing tales. Her name is Leda. Zeus sighs dramatically. Not the love-struck kind of sigh.
Either. This is more of an I guess I have to seduce her, it's in the prophecy kind of sigh.
He reaches for his ever-trusty shapeshift strategy list, TM. Yes, he has one, and yes, it's mostly ridiculous. Historians still argue whether these stories of divine romance are metaphor, mistranslation, or just ancient fan fiction with too much
wine involved, but what's clear is that Zeus had a habit, when in doubt, transform. You flip through his previous disguises in your head. Bull? Used that for Europa, shower of golden rain? That was for Danae, still awkward. Eagle? Too aggressive, and no charisma.
Swan? Gentle? Graceful? Weirdly symbolic? Yes, Zeus thinks. Swan it is. Now the thing about Zeus is that he never just turns into a swan quietly. No, he has to make a whole production of it. Wings spread with a theatrical whoosh, feathers shimmer like stardust, and suddenly the king of the gods is honking softly and wobbling through the sky like a weird, glowing poultry blimp. You're trying not to laugh, but let's be honest, it's a little silly. Below on earth, the garden is quiet. Leda walks alone, her robes brushing the grass. Birds sing politely from cypress trees. She doesn't know that a literal god is flapping toward her, desperate to make a myth happen. And here's a fun twist. Some fringe versions of the tale claim that Zeus didn't just show up as any swan. No, he disguised himself as a swan fleeing from an eagle. That's right. This all starts with Zeus playing the role of damsel in distress bird. Historians still argue whether this part was added later as a weird plot device or if it had some ritualistic symbolism. Either way, the idea of Zeus dive-bombing into Leda's arms, honking pitifully, is exactly the kind of chaotic energy you'd expect from Greek mythology. Up above, Hera watches from the palace balcony. She's Zeus's wife, Queen of Olympus, and perpetually one eyebrow away from smiting someone. She sees the swan-shaped drama unfolding and sips her nectar like, seriously? You follow Zeus, feathers rustling softly in the wind as he descends into the mortal garden. It's twilight now. The sky is painted with streaks of gold and amethyst. Everything slows. Even the cicadas hush. Leda kneels near a pond. She hears a rustle, turns, and finds a trembling swan, wings flecked with dew, eyes too human to be just a bird's. She hesitates. She's no fool, but she's also a queen, raised on omens and stories. A bird like this could mean anything. And you, dear listener, are left hovering quietly as the scene unfolds in deliberate, dreamlike stillness, you wonder. Was she enchanted, confused, compassionate? Historians still argue whether Leda welcomed the swan willingly or if the myth softens a darker truth. The ambiguity, preserved across centuries, is part of what gives this story its strange staying power. The garden fades. The stars bloom above like scattered pearls. Somewhere, thunder mutters softly, and you, still floating with swan-feathered gods and skeptical queens, feel your breath slow. Tomorrow, this myth will spiral into eggs, wars, and one particularly beautiful face that will launch 1,000 ships. But tonight, it's just a bird, a woman, and the gentle, echoing silence between choices. Zeus, still wrapped in the warm, feathered disguise of a swan, lingers in Leda's garden as the dusk deepens into a velvet night. You drift just above the pond's glassy surface, watching moonlight stripe across the ripples like brushed silver. Leda stands frozen, one hand hovering mid-air between curiosity and caution. The swan who is not a swan tilts its head with just the right mix of vulnerability and supernatural charm. Mount Olympus watches too. Far above, perched on its shining peak, the palace of the gods simmers with its own brand of chaos. You leave the garden behind for now and rise again into the heavens through clouds that taste faintly of honey and static electricity. A soft harp strums somewhere, not from inspiration, just because Apollo is bored. Olympus is less a realm of divine order and more an eternally dysfunctional family reunion. The gods live here in endless, glittering drama. There are grand banquet halls with columns taller than dreams, golden chariots parked at impossible angles, and Hera yelling at a nymph for rearranging her peacock feathers. Again. You tiptoe across marble floors that are always just warm enough, passing an open-air throne room that smells like roasted figs and sandalwood. There's Dionysus, asleep under a table again. Hermes zips by in a blur of winged sandals and questionable errands. Artemis sharpens her arrows while muttering about how men ruin everything. The daily life of the gods isn't exactly all divine purpose and thunderous decrees. It's more like an eternal office party with too much wine and not enough HR oversight. Zeus's absences, which are many and frequent, rarely go unnoticed. Hera, goddess of marriage, has perfected the art of glaring into space with such precision. It creates small, localized windstorms. You float beside her now as she observes Earth through her scrying mirror, muttering, "If he's a swan again, I swear." Some myths say the gods feast daily on ambrosia and nectar. But the fringe detail no one tells you? It gives them horrible indigestion. That's why Hephaestus, god of blacksmithing, built a giant fan beneath the dining hall to keep the air moving.
Olympus smells amazing, but only because of ancient ventilation hacks. You slide through the dining hall next.
Columns carved with constellations stretch high above, and golden ivy creeps along the ceiling. Athena debates with Poseidon over something involving mortals, ships, and city names. Honestly, they've been arguing since 1200 BCE. Historians still argue whether the Olympian lifestyle was meant to mirror the Greek ideal of balance between leisure and war, or whether it was just poetic license run wild. But one thing's for sure, the gods were more like flawed celebrities than flawless deities. Back in the throne room, Hestia, goddess of the hearth, tends the eternal fire. She's one of the few calm presences here. Her job is basically being the universe's warm blanket. You pause by her for a moment. She smiles faintly and offers you a honey cake. It tastes like sleep. You float out again, brushing past scrolls of fate tangled in Clotho's spinning wheel. The three fates, as always, are bickering over whether to cut the thread of a prince or just tangle it until his horoscope looks impossible. Meanwhile, on Earth, the scene is shifting. Leda, back in her garden, lifts the strange swan into her arms. His feathers are impossibly soft, smelling of rain and something ancient. She doesn't know why she does it, just that it feels like holding something, both fragile and infinite. The pond glows slightly under starlight. Somewhere, a cicada stutters. The swan closes its eyes, and Mount Olympus holds its breath. The gods, despite all their power, are intensely nosy. You feel their attention tilt downward like satellite dishes of divine gossip. Apollo squints dramatically. Hera clenches her goblet so tightly it begins to crack. Here's a curious note. Fringe versions of the myth suggest that swans were considered symbols of prophecy and transformation. To ancient eyes, a swan descending from the sky wasn't just weird, it was an omen, possibly divine, possibly disastrous. Leda doesn't know she's stepping into legend. She doesn't know her children, yes, plural, will be debated about for millennia. All she knows is that the swan in her arms is strangely warm and heartbreakingly still. Historians still argue whether this version of the myth, where Leda willingly comforts the swan, was meant to soften the tale, or whether it reflects a lost ritual about divine union through animal forms. Either way, it's hauntingly surreal, and, let's be honest, swans are kind of jerks in real life. They hiss, they bite, they chase small children. But this one is pure myth. His wings wrap around Leda like clouds. His breath smells of ozone and lilacs. Time seems to slow. Back in Olympus, Ares bets 5 drachmas that this will end in a war. He's not wrong. You drift toward the edge of the palace, where the stars stretch closer and the breeze grows cooler. Eros, the god of love, lounges nearby, shooting little arrows into empty wine bottles. He yawns and says, "Another mortal, another disguise. Honestly, Dad needs
a new hobby."
And you begin to see the pattern. Zeus isn't just some wandering lover. His transformations, whether bull, rain, eagle, or swan, aren't just pick-up lines. They're power moves. They blur boundaries, rewrite stories, and force mortals into
Myths. Over and over again, you float down again just as Leda lays the swan gently on the grass. It's quiet. You hear her whisper something. The swan stirs. Then nothing. No flash of lightning. No musical cue, just silence. Tomorrow, this will be the start of everything. But for now, it's just a woman in a garden, the moon above, and
A bird too perfect to be real, and Olympus returns to its golden hum. The swan is gone by morning. You drift softly over Sparta, watching early sunlight spill like warm syrup over the palace walls. Leda, queen of this land, stirs beneath her silken sheets, eyes fluttering open in that strange half-state between memory and dream. Did it happen? Was it real? Her hand brushes her stomach, and her breath catches an instinctive pause, as if her body remembers more than her mind dares to. Sparta in this age is not the warrior state you're imagining yet, not the place where children wrestle wolves before breakfast. That comes later. Right now, it's a flourishing kingdom ruled by King Tyndareus, Leda's husband. He's a practical man, deeply involved in governance, livestock counts, and the careful maintenance of palace drama levels. You hover through the marble halls of the palace as they wake with Leda. Servants begin their quiet clatter. Musicians warm up lutes and lyres in a shaded alcove. Someone, somewhere, is already arguing about olives. Leda walks the garden path again, but the swan is not there. Only the pond remains, still and glassy, reflecting her face as if asking a question she doesn't know how to answer. You pause with her. The swan's presence still lingers in the air, a smell of feathers, rain, and a god's mischief. She touches the grass where he lay. Nothing. Not even a feather left behind, and then, a few weeks later, the eggs arrive. Yes, eggs. Not metaphorical ones, not poetic symbols. Actual, large, glistening eggs, and before you panic on Leda's behalf, just know she does too, because this is not how pregnancies are supposed to go. Even by mythological standards, this is next-level bizarre. Some fringe versions of the myth say she laid 2 eggs. Others claim 4. The number wobbles through time like a drunk satyr on stilts. But the outcome is oddly consistent. Inside those eggs are children, extraordinary children, as shiny with fate as Zeus's beard oil. Historians still argue whether this egg-laying part was original to the myth or added later to emphasize Leda's strangeness, purity, or symbolic link to divine birth. Either way, you now have a Greek queen with a clutch of supernatural eggs under her bed. Sleep tight, everyone. Tyndareus is understandably confused, but like any husband of a woman who just laid eggs, he wisely chooses a path of supportive silence. Maybe he believes the gods are at work. Maybe he's just too afraid to ask. You follow him as he paces the halls, muttering to himself about swans and omens, and whether there's a temple you can call about this sort of thing. The eggs eventually hatch, and the babies that emerge aren't covered in feathers or glowing with celestial light. They look mostly normal, human, but with that eerie stillness of myth. You peer into the nursery, where 4 babies lie swaddled in fine linen, eyes wide, their fates already tangled in legend. Their names are Helen, Clytemnestra, Castor, and Pollux. Depending on the version, the parentage gets muddled fast. Some say Helen and Pollux are Zeus's divine children, while Clytemnestra and Castor belong to Tyndareus. Others flip it. A few say all 4 are part god, part human, part swan. Yes, it's a mess, but Helen, Helen, her beauty is immediate. Even as a child, her eyes hold storms. You look into them and see ships, wars, burning towers. She is fate in a cradle. Even the nursemaid seems to step more carefully near her. One fringe version claims that when Helen opened her eyes for the first time, a rose bloomed instantly on the windowsill. Another says Apollo himself visited her cradle and whispered something no one else could hear. Clytemnestra, by contrast, is the storm behind the beauty, strong-jawed, sharp-eyed. You know where her future goes, husband, betrayal, blood, but right now she just gnaws on a fig like every other toddler. And then there's Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri, the twins. They sleep curled in perfect symmetry, like commas in a divine sentence. You smile because you know they'll end up in the stars. Back on Olympus, the gods are playing spectator sport with this mortal mystery. Zeus, reclined on a cloud, is trying not to look smug. Hera, draped in furs and suspicion, hasn't spoken to him in 3 days. Not because of the swan thing exactly, it's the principle of the matter. He keeps doing this. Every time she thinks they're past it, there's another woman, another animal costume, another awkward explanation. Hermes, never one to waste an opportunity, has started selling tiny carved swan figurines in the marketplace. Inspired by a true story, he claims, they're very popular. You return to Sparta. Leda stands on her balcony, 4 children tumbling around her feet. She has the look of someone who's accepted that life will never be simple again. You see it in her eyes, serenity edged with a thin ring of exhaustion. You know the type. In the distance, a chorus sings faintly. The words are old and half lost, but they speak of fate born from feathers, of gods who descend as birds, and of queens who hatch legends in silence. You follow that music into the garden again. The pond remains still. The swan never returned, and yet everything changed. You sit now in the dustier corners of Sparta's royal nursery, watching 4 lives begin to unravel in very different directions. Helen grows quickly, her features sharpening into something sculptural, almost unsettling. Strangers come to glimpse her from a distance, not because she's a royal, but because there's something about her that makes people forget what they were talking about. You'd think this would lead to a lovely, peaceful life. Spoiler. It very much does not. Helen's beauty is the kind of beauty that makes poets weep, yes, but also the kind that makes cities burn. Even as a child, she walks like she's aware of her effect on the world. Her footsteps are quiet, yet deliberate. You hear palace guards accidentally drop their spears when she passes. A chef once burned 3 loaves of barley bread just watching. Her blink, and then there's Castor and Pollux, inseparable, reckless, hilarious even now. You see them sneak away from their nursemaid to wrestle in the mud, laugh until they fall asleep, and swear blood oath brotherhood every other Tuesday. They're technically already brothers, but don't mention that. It's a twin thing. Clytemnestra, the eldest, always watches them. Not in envy, not quite. More like someone who's memorizing the flaws in a tapestry so she can unravel it later. You notice she's the one who puts broken things back together when others stop caring. A snapped doll's arm, a shattered goblet. Her own feelings mostly. Meanwhile, their father Tyndareus tries to make sense of it all. He raises all 4 children as his own, divine or not, and focuses on training them in proper Spartan values, discipline, strength, honor. You watch as Helen balances a silver bowl on her head without blinking. Castor rides a goat through the garden. Pollux climbs a fig tree. Clytemnestra does everyone's math for them. But Tyndareus worries most about Helen, because even now princes are writing letters. Offers come from every corner of the known world, Let me marry your daughter. I will build you a temple. I will name my warhorse after you. The usual. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. One suitor sent a miniature sculpture of himself, carved entirely from beeswax. Helen left it out in the sun on purpose. Oops. So Tyndareus holds a council. Advisors, oracles, and the usual amount of uncomfortable poets gather in the courtyard. What to do about a daughter whose face might sink navies? Historians still argue whether this moment was real political planning or mythic embellishment, but
either way, Tyndareus finally devises a plan. Or maybe he just steals Odysseus's plan. It depends who you ask. The plan is this. All the suitors will swear an oath, a sacred oath. No matter who Helen chooses, they must promise to protect her.
marriage, no war, no petty squabbles, no dramatic love letters involving birds, just peace. You sit with Helen as the suitors arrive. Men from kingdoms you've only heard of in songs, tall ones, short ones, ones with suspiciously shiny armor. Even Menelaus, the eventual winner, stands awkwardly in the back, brushing imaginary
lint off his tunic. Helen walks through them like a summer storm. Calm, inevitable, and just like that she picks Menelaus.
no thunder, no swoon, just a nod. You blink. That's it? But yes, that's it, for now. The twins, meanwhile, grow into full-on local legends. Castor becomes famed for horsemanship, Pollux for his fists. They tour the countryside, enter competitions, and make offhand comments like, "Wanna go slay some bandits later?" Their bond is unshakable. Wherever one is, the other follows, like echoes or shadows. They get matching tattoos, figuratively speaking. But while they thrive on Earth, the divine half of them pulls upward. You notice Zeus occasionally glancing down from Olympus, a flicker of something like pride behind his beard. Hera doesn't comment. She's currently organizing a council to ban swan transformations altogether. "It's not ethical," she mutters. And what about Leda? She watches her children move out into the world. 2 toward love, 2 toward war. And she wonders if any of them truly belong to her. She tends to her garden. The pond grows mossy. And one evening she sits beside it and whispers to the wind, "Why a swan?" The wind does not answer, but you wonder too. Some say Zeus chose a swan because of purity, because swans mate for life, because they represent beauty. Others say it was simply a convenient disguise with enough grace to lure and enough mystery to confuse, but historians still argue whether Leda loved the swan, feared it, or simply accepted it as part of her fate. The myths don't tell you how often she looked back at that moment, whether she regretted opening her arms, whether she ever saw a bird in flight again without her breath catching. You leave her there in the twilight, the garden quiet once more. And in the distance, you hear drums, slow, rhythmic, almost like footsteps. War is coming, eventually. But tonight is still peaceful, for now. You're floating now, not above Sparta, but somewhere east of it, where the dust is finer and the palaces shinier. Welcome to Troy. You'll be seeing a lot more of this place soon, but for now, let's meet the man who's about to throw the entire Mediterranean into chaos. Paris. Yes, that Paris. The prince with the jawline that launched 1,000 ships. But when you first spot him, he's not a prince at all, just a shepherd on Mount Ida, chasing goats and avoiding responsibility, which, to be fair, is a pretty relatable lifestyle. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In many versions of the myth, Paris wasn't raised at court. His father, King Priam, was warned by a prophecy that his newborn son would cause the fall of Troy, so, logical as ever, he had the baby abandoned on a hillside. Because that always works out well in myths, but Paris doesn't die. Of course, he doesn't. A kind shepherd finds him, raises him, and names him Paris. The boy grows up strong, good with animals, and honestly a little too charming for someone who wears sheepskin tunics and talks to birds. You drift beside him as he lounges, beneath a tree, tossing an apple in the air. He has no idea yet that the gods are about to absolutely wreck his chill. The trouble starts at a wedding. Peleus and Thetis, a mortal man and a sea nymph, are getting married, and the gods are invited, all of them, except Eris, goddess of discord, which, if you're trying to avoid drama, is a baffling choice. It's like planning a peaceful family dinner and leaving out the one relative who thrives on passive aggression. So Eris crashes the wedding anyway, and she brings a gift, a golden apple inscribed with 3 little words, to the fairest. Q. Divine chaos. 3 goddesses immediately step up. Hera, Queen of Olympus, Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, and Aphrodite, goddess of love. Each claims the apple. Each insists she is the fairest. Zeus, who has finally learned to stop volunteering for trouble, decides not to judge. Instead, he appoints a mortal to settle the matter. Guess who? You watch as Hermes zips down to Mount Ida, finds Paris, and delivers the cosmic equivalent of a jury summons. Paris is baffled but agrees. After all, how often do you get to personally evaluate 3 goddesses in a beauty contest? You follow him to a sun-dappled glade where the goddesses arrive in shimmer and thunder. They don't waste time. Hera steps forward first. Her pitch is all power. "Pick me," she says smoothly, "and I'll make you king of all Asia." Wealth, empire, palaces for days. Athena comes next. She offers glory. "Choose me, and I'll make you the wisest and most victorious of men. No one will defeat you, not even taxes." And then comes Aphrodite. She doesn't promise gold or glory, just a name, Helen. "You can have the most beautiful woman in the world," she purrs. "No kingdom, no war, just love." Paris doesn't hesitate. He gives the apple to Aphrodite, and that, right there, is where everything begins to fall apart. Historians still argue whether this judgment of Paris was meant to reflect real tensions between Greek city-states and their values: power, Hera; strategy, Athena; desire, Aphrodite; or if it was simply a mythic allegory for bad decisions in pretty packaging. Either way, you can't deny its consequences. Back in Sparta, Helen is married now. Menelaus, her new husband, treats her well enough, though you notice she spends a lot of time staring at the sea. And then Paris arrives. He comes under the guise of diplomacy, a guest at court, all smiles and polished sandals. You watch Helen watch him, and it's not hard to see the spark. Whether it's Aphrodite's influence or just a fateful chemistry, something clicks. Some fringe tellings say Helen resisted, that she was kidnapped. Others say she fell in love at first sight. Still others suggest she wanted to be taken. You'll never know for sure. Even Homer wasn't clear, but one night, with a hush over Sparta and moonlight silvering the wine-dark sea, Paris and Helen vanish. By the time dawn arrives, Menelaus is screaming at the horizon, his kingdom dishonored. You're hovering above the docks now, where warships are already being prepared. That oath, the one all her suitors swore? Yeah, time to cash that in. Odysseus, Agamemnon, Achilles, they all gather. Not because they love Helen necessarily, but because they swore. and because honor, in myth and history alike, often carries a very sharp spear. But you? You're back with Helen now, on the ship. She leans over the rail, wind catching her hair like a banner. Paris stands beside her, triumphant, clueless, and already composing bad poetry in his head. And Troy rises ahead, golden, strong, unaware that it's about to host the most dramatic 10-year house guest situation of all time. You take one last glance at Sparta, now empty of its queen. And somewhere, not far from the palace garden, a swan-shaped shadow passes silently over the grass. Troy glows under the Anatolian sun, its towers shining like polished bone, its walls high enough to intimidate even the most seasoned invader. As you float above its bustling streets, the city feels alive, buzzing with trade, philosophy, and a stubborn sense of immortality. You wonder how long that will last. Paris and Helen arrive in grand style, flanked by soldiers and sea salt. The people cheer at first, some out of curiosity, others out of habit. But as Helen steps onto Trojan soil, a hush falls. It's that quiet moment before thunder, that dry breath before the rain. King Priam, Paris's father, welcomes them with the patient warmth of a man who knows better than to question the gods, though you can practically see the internal monologue in his eyes. Really? The most beautiful woman in the world? This won't cause any problems at all. You trail Helen through marble halls and golden courtyards. Servants whisper, noble women stare. The atmosphere thickens like honey in summer heat. Troy doesn't yet know the price of this guest, but it will. And meanwhile, back in Greece, all diplomatic pretenses have been thrown directly into the sea. Menelaus storms into the throne room of his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, dragging a handful of broken wine goblets and betrayal-shaped fury. "She's gone," he growls. "They took her." Agamemnon, a man who always looks like he's trying to win an argument with destiny, sees opportunity in this mess. He doesn't just want Helen back, he wants war, glory. A name sung long after his bones are dust, so the call goes out to all corners of the Greek world. Those who swore the oath of Tyndareus, it's time to deliver. You fly across the Aegean, watching the heroes gather like storm clouds. Odysseus, reluctantly clever, tries to fake madness to avoid the war, but is quickly outsmarted. Achilles, not yet famous, sulks under a palm tree trying to decide if eternal glory is worth a short life. Spoiler, he says yes. Ships are built. Armor is polished. Offerings are made to the gods, who are now taking sides like it's divine reality TV. Hera and Athena, slighted by Paris, back the Greeks. Aphrodite naturally stands with her golden boy and the queen he stole. Historians still argue whether the real Trojan War, if it happened at all, was over a woman, or more likely, about trade routes and control of the Hellespont. But myths rarely care for logistics. They care for spectacle. You're now drifting above the Greek fleet as it gathers at Aulis, sails billowing like restless ghosts. But there's a problem. No wind. The ships sit there, motionless, week after week. The sea is glass. Soldiers grow
restless. Food spoils, morale drops faster than a Spartan with lead sandals. And here comes your fringe tidbit. The gods aren't just idly watching. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, is angry. Why? Because Agamemnon killed one of her sacred deer.
either by accident or arrogant aim.
Either way, she demands a price, a heavy one. She wants his daughter, Iphigenia. You hover over Agamemnon's tent as he argues with the priests, then with himself. His generals whisper. His wife, Clytemnestra. Yes, that Clytemnestra, Helen.
Sister has no idea what's about to happen. Agamemnon sends for Iphigenia under the guise of marrying her to Achilles. But when she arrives, young and radiant, she is led not to an altar of love, but one of sacrifice. The wind picks up. Historians still argue whether Iphigenia was truly killed or spirited away at the last second by Artemis, replaced with a deer. In some tellings, she becomes a priestess in a far-off land. In others, she dies screaming. Either way, the fleet finally sails, and the gods lean forward in their seats. You cross the sea with them, over churning waves, bronze shields catching. Sunlight, the air thick with sea salt and song. 10 years, that's how long this war will last, and Troy is not ready. Paris struts through its gates, proudly showing off Helen like she's both prize and prophecy. Helen, ever enigmatic, says little. You can't tell if she's content or captive. Even she might not know. In quiet moments, she stands on the balcony and watches the sea, as if waiting for something to appear on the horizon, or perhaps waiting for the gods to change their minds. You pass over the city walls, built, some say, by Poseidon himself, impossibly high, unbreakable, but you know how this story ends, and it's not with unbroken walls. In the great halls of Troy, King Priam orders defences strengthened. His sons train harder. Hector, the eldest, is noble, serious, burdened with the weight of a kingdom. You like him immediately. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, people listen. And as the war begins, the world shifts. Skies darken, spears gleam. The names that fill old songs, Achilles, Patroclus, Ajax, Diomedes, they march toward destiny.
Not all of them will return. But Helen watches, always. Her presence stretches across the battlefield like a shadow. She never lifts a sword, she never fires a single arrow. But every wound, every flame, every broken city brick, somehow they
all seem to bend back to her. You leave her there, wrapped in a silk cloak, standing at the window, the sea far behind her now. Paris sleeps beside her, and the gods, still watching, ready the next move in this long and terrible game.
War has a way of flattening the days into dust and noise, but you float through the early years of the siege like a ghost in slow motion. Troy endures, the Greeks fume, and the gods meddle like they've just discovered reality television. You're
drifting now above the Greek encampment, which has grown into something between a fortress and a high school parking lot. Tents stretch in neat rows along the shore. Spears lean against rocks. Bronze glints in the hot sun. Occasionally someone gets bored and throws a javelin at a tree for fun. Achilles, ever the golden boy, is the star of the show. He struts across the sand like he owns it, which, to be fair, he sort of does. He's fast, he's nearly unbeatable in battle, and he has the tragic intensity of someone who knows he's living on borrowed time. Remember, his mother, Thetis, dipped him in the river Styx as a baby, holding him by the heel, which of course didn't get the magical armor treatment. That heel? We'll get back to it. Just bookmark it like a cursed souvenir. Patroclus is always nearby, the best friend. There may be more than best friend, depending on which scholar you ask. Historians still argue whether their bond was platonic, romantic, or somewhere between. Whatever the label, it runs deep. You pass by Odysseus quietly hatching schemes, Ajax hulking and loyal, Nestor old enough to remember the Titans probably. They fight, they feast, they wait. The Greeks launch wave after wave at the city, and Troy somehow holds. You see Hector leading the defense, calm, strategic, a prince who wants peace but fights because he must. Unlike his brother Paris, Hector doesn't smile often, and when he does, it's the tired kind that comes from understanding just how much is at stake.
And inside the palace, Helen still watches from her window. She's become part of the cityscape now, talked about, never approached. Some Trojans adore her, others curse her name. She hears it all. Your quirky tidbit. Ancient sources say Helen
Might have woven tapestries during the siege, recording battles in thread, as if she couldn't stand to let history be told without her hand in it. Art as survival, or maybe just distraction. Meanwhile, the gods bicker like immortal toddlers. Apollo, radiant and unbothered, sides with the Trojans. His arrows strike plague into the Greek camp when Agamemnon insults his priest by stealing his daughter. Bad idea, real bad. Agamemnon, in a display of textbook leadership, doubles down and then makes things worse by taking Briseis, Achilles' prize of war. Achilles, predictably, loses it. Now the Greeks are in trouble. Their best fighter refuses to fight, sitting in his tent with a storm behind his eyes. He won't budge. Not until it's personal, and personal it gets. The Trojans push the Greeks back to their ships. Fires rise, morale cracks. Patroclus, desperate to help, dons Achilles' armor and leads the Myrmidons into battle, pretending to be the hero himself. It works, briefly. The Trojans fall back in confusion, but Hector finds him. You watch from above as the duel unfolds, not dramatic, not drawn out, just fast and fatal. Patroclus falls. Hector strips the borrowed armor, and the Greeks reel. When the news reaches Achilles, he doesn't speak, he just stares. The rage comes slowly, like an earthquake beneath the ocean. Quiet at first, then catastrophic. You've never seen grief like this. It strips the gold from his aura, leaves him raw. He howls on the shore. He blames everyone, himself, the gods, the war, Helen, probably the mosquitoes. Then he returns to battle, clad in new armor forged by Hephaestus himself, complete with a shield so ornate it could serve as a museum. The reborn Achilles cuts through the Trojan army like a scythe. And he wants one man. You follow him into the dust-choked heart of the battlefield. Spears fly, shields shatter, and finally there's Hector. They meet outside the city gates. Hector knows he can't win, but he stands tall anyway. He asks that, if he dies, his body be returned to Troy.
Achilles doesn't answer. The duel is short, brutal. Achilles kills him, ties his body to a chariot, drags him in the dirt. You flinch. Even the gods wince. Even Helen turns from the window. Inside the city, Priam collapses, and then, in one of the myth's most wrenching turns, he does the unthinkable.
The old king, alone, sneaks into the Greek camp. He kneels before Achilles, kisses the hands that killed his son, and begs for Hector's body. Achilles, still burning with grief, finally breaks. He weeps. They share food, words, a moment of peace. Achilles returns Hector's body, and for one night the war pauses. It's a rare kind of silence, the kind that echoes louder than war drums. And as you drift above them, above the fires and shields and bitter lullabies, you hear it too. The gods have gone quiet for once. Helen is still. Even Paris stops composing couplets, but it won't last. Nothing does in Troy.
Achilles is back in the fight, but the war has warped him. You see it in his eyes, too bright, too empty. He moves like someone who knows his end is already written, and now he's just speeding toward it. Troy trembles each time his footsteps
Hit the dirt, You hover above the city, watching it brace against the weight of prophecy. Everyone knows the Greeks won't leave until something breaks, someone, or maybe the whole sky. And somewhere behind the chaos, Paris is still trying to write poetry. He's been training, yes, but let's be honest, Paris is a decent archer and a world-class heartbreaker. He's not a frontline kind of guy. Helen remains distant. Her days spent between palace walls and the ghost of the sea she left behind. She no longer flinches at the sounds of battle. That silence in her? It's becoming something solid. Now here's your mainstream historical fact for this round. There was a real city, maybe several, on the mound of Swan-Lake, where ancient Troy is believed to have stood. Archaeologists have uncovered layers upon layers of ruins, evidence of sieges, fires, and rebuilding across centuries. Was any of it the Trojan War? No one's sure. But the myth sits heavy over those stones back to the Greeks. They want to win badly. Odysseus, always spinning ideas like silk, hatches a plan. Find Philoctetes. You zip across the Aegean to a remote island where a man has been festering for years. Philoctetes had been bitten by a snake on the way to Troy. The wound wouldn't heal, the smell was legendary, and the Greeks had abandoned him. Charming, but here's the thing, he owns the bow of Heracles. Yes, the demigod, and prophecy says Troy can't fall without it. So now Odysseus and Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, because yes, that's suddenly a factor, have to sweet-talk a very angry, very smelly archer into coming back. You watch from the shadows as they lie, negotiate, confess. Eventually, Philoctetes agrees, partly for revenge, partly because prophecy has a way of getting under your skin like sand in your sandals. Meanwhile, Paris is about to get his own moment in the spotlight. In a rare flash of competence, or maybe just dumb luck, he fires a poisoned arrow that strikes Achilles right in the heel. The one place Thetis didn't cover. It's not dramatic. Achilles bleeds, stumbles, dies. Just like that, the Greeks howl. Mourning spreads like a storm tide. Patroclus is already gone, and now this? You half expect the sky to tear open. Achilles is burned on a great pyre. His ashes mingled with Patroclus's per his wish. You imagine Helen, somewhere in the palace, pausing as the smoke climbs into the sky. If she cries, no one sees. Now here's your quirky tidbit. In some fringe versions of the myth, Achilles' ghost demands a final sacrifice. Polyxena, a Trojan princess, they kill her at his tomb, because war always needs one more tragedy. With Achilles gone, the Greeks turn to cunning. Strength didn't work. Time for trickery. Odysseus's idea is bold, absurd, iconic. The wooden horse. You float beside him as he sketches it out in the sand. Huge, hollow, gifted to the Trojans as a fake peace offering. Look, he says, it's a present. We're
totally leaving, definitely not hiding in this thing. The horse is built, towering and strange. Some Greeks fake a retreat, sailing out of sight. Others climb inside. Odysseus, Menelaus, Neoptolemus.
It's cramped, dark, and smells suspiciously of fear and last-minute regret. The Trojans find the horse and react in every possible way. Some suspicious, some thrilled, some just tired. Laocoon, a priest, warns them, beware Greeks bearing gifts, he says. Then he gets dramatically eaten by sea serpents, because when the gods want your plan to work, they really want it to work. Historians still argue whether the Trojan horse was a real strategy or just mythic symbolism maybe. It represented siege engines or trickery in general. But one way or another, the Trojans bring it inside. You drift above as night falls. Troy celebrates. Fires blaze, wine flows, music rises. Inside the horse, silence, sweat, breath held, and then the signal. The Greek ships return, silent as sharks from the belly of the horse. Warriors drop into sleeping streets. Gates are opened. Chaos floods in. You've never seen a city die like this. Flames lick the temples. Soldiers rush through corridors. Priam, old and noble, is cut down at the altar. Cassandra, the doomed prophetess, screams the truth. But no one ever listens to her. Neoptolemus kills and kills and kills. He isn't his father, but he's worse in some ways. Rawer, colder. It's not war for him, it's inheritance. Paris is shot and dies, not in glory, not in verse. Just one more. Body in the rubble, and Helen. Menelaus finds her. You expect a confrontation, but here's the strange thing: he doesn't kill her. Some say she bears her chest and he's disarmed by her beauty. Others say she simply speaks his name, and something old, something lost, stirs in him. He takes her back. Just like that, you watch them board a ship, leaving Troy behind in smoke and ash. The war is over, and yet nothing really ends. The Greeks scatter, their returns cursed. Odysseus will take 10 years to get home. Agamemnon will be murdered in his bath by Clytemnestra. Even Menelaus and Helen, supposedly reunited, will live under a strange silence. Helen survives, of course. She always does. You see her, years later, staring at the sea again, always the sea, as if waiting for the next myth to catch up. Troy is gone. You hover above its ruins, where smoke coils like exhausted ghosts. The city that held out for 10 long years has crumbled in a single night because of a horse, of all things. Somewhere in the dust, a child's toy lies beside
a broken helmet. You don't need to see who wore it. You already know, but you're not done.
Not even close, because what happens after the fall of Troy might be even more twisted than the war itself. The gods are still watching, still bored, and mortals still haven't learned when to stop poking them. Let's start with the survivors.
Aeneas, yes, that Aeneas is one of the few Trojans who escapes. You follow him as he carries his father Anchises on his back and leads his young son by the hand.
That statue you've seen in random parks of a man holding an old guy and a kid. That's this moment. Aeneas becomes a symbol of endurance. Maybe guilt too. He wanders for years, eventually ending up in Italy, where his descendants, according to legend, will found Rome. Yep, that Rome. The one with Caesar, togas, and way too many marble busts. This connection, pure mythology, but it gave the Romans a great PR boost. Now for your quirky tidbit. In one version of the myth, Aeneas almost dies during the fall of Troy, but is spared because Aphrodite, his divine mother, literally scoops him up like a kitten and carries him off. Protective parenting at its most mythologically extra. Meanwhile, back with the Greeks, things are not going great. Sure, they've won, but it's the kind of victory that comes with a receipt too long to read. Most of the returning kings will meet terrible ends. They don't call it a Nostos tragedy for nothing. Odysseus, the cleverest of them all, is about to have the worst commute in history. You drift along as his ship sets out from Troy, sleek against the waves. He's tired but hopeful, ready to get back to Ithaca and his ever-patient wife, Penelope. Except the gods aren't done with him. Poseidon, still salty about that whole blinding my Cyclops son thing that hasn't even happened yet, decides to make Odysseus's return a nightmare of storms, sirens, and increasingly bizarre detours. Let's preview the hits, shall we? First stop. The land of the lotus eaters. One bite of their dreamy plant, and you forget your home, your name, and probably your Netflix password. Odysseus has to physically drag his men back to the ships. Then there's Polyphemus, the Cyclops, big, hungry, and not a fan of guests. Odysseus introduces himself as nobody, gets the monster drunk, and blinds him with a burning stake. Cool trick. Too bad he ruins it by yelling his real name while sailing away. Classic Odysseus, Poseidon hears and laughs, and makes a note you coast over their next pit stop. Aeolus, the wind god, gives Odysseus a literal bag of winds to speed the journey home. Almost works until his crew, assuming it's treasure, opens it. Cue massive storm. Back to square one. Next, the Laestrygonians, giant cannibals, not a good time. Then Circe, the witch. She turns his crew into pigs, which sounds worse than it actually is, given how much they whine. Odysseus resists. They become friends, maybe lovers. He stays a year. Time has stopped making sense. Afterward, a detour to the underworld. Yep, that underworld. Ghosts everywhere. Tiresias, the dead prophet, gives Odysseus cryptic travel tips. He also chats with his mum, who died from worry. Ouch. Now your mainstream historical fact. Some scholars believe parts of Odysseus's journey were inspired by real Mediterranean locations, like volcanic islands, coastal winds, or ship-eating
reefs. Myth built on geography. Back on the sea he passes the sirens, beautiful voices, deadly intentions. He has himself tied to the mast while his crew plugs their ears. He wants to hear danger but not die from it. Mood. Then comes Scylla and Charybdis.
Rock monster on one side, giant whirlpool on the other. Lose 6 men or lose everything. Odysseus chooses the smaller tragedy. No winning, just less losing. Eventually they reach the island of the sun god Helios, told explicitly not to touch. The sacred cattle. They touch the cattle. Zeus smites the ship. Everyone dies except Odysseus, who washes ashore on yet another island. That island? Ogygia, home to Calypso, a goddess who loves him. She keeps him there 7 years, offers him immortality if he stays. He says no, that's love, or maybe a deep hatred of cave furniture. At long last, the gods pity him. Hermes shows up. Calypso lets him go. He builds a raft, survives another storm, finally reaches Phaeacia, where people are almost normal. They hear his story, cry a little, then put him on a boat to Ithaca, and this time he makes it. But after 20 years away, Ithaca isn't exactly waiting with open arms. His palace is overrun with suitors trying to marry Penelope and steal his throne. She's kept them at bay by weaving a shroud by day and unraveling it at night. Patience turned into strategy. Odysseus returns in disguise, tests everyone's loyalty, and then, in a finale that would make Tarantino proud, slaughters the suitors with his son Telemachus.
Arrows fly. Blood soaks the hall. Home is reclaimed, but peace will take longer. Historians still argue whether Odysseus is the model of a cunning hero or a deeply flawed, dangerously vengeful man. Depends on your angle and how much sleep you've
lost. And Helen? Oh, she and Menelaus eventually end up in Egypt. Some stories even say she never made it to Troy, that it was a phantom version of her all along. A divine fake-out. Confusing? Yes, but also somehow poetic. You've now wandered far from Zeus and his swan disguise, but every thread still leads back to that first ripple in time. One choice, one desire, and a world that bent itself to accommodate. The consequences, the gods have stopped watching, for now. But the myths, they never sleep. So here you are, drifting through the hush that follows a mythic war, picking over the bones of legends like a curious owl in a half-burned library. You've seen Troy fall, kings crumble, lovers weep, and gods bicker. And yet somehow we haven't talked about the real villain of this whole mess, prophecy. Yes, prophecy, the Greek equivalent of spoiler alert. No matter how many times someone hears a vision of the future, they either ignore it, try to cheat it, or bring it about themselves just by being so anxious about it. It's like trying not to think about pink elephants. Guess what you're doing now? Let's take a closer look at how fate and foresight mess with everyone's lives, starting with our boy Oedipus. You float down through time and space into Thebes, lovely spot, cursed beyond belief. Before Oedipus is even born, his parents, Laius and Jocasta, receive a prophecy. Their son will kill his father and marry his mother. Yikes. Their response? Abandon the baby on a mountainside with his feet bound. That'll fix it. Spoiler? It doesn't. The baby is rescued and raised by another royal family, unaware of his origin. Years later, Oedipus hears a prophecy of his own. He'll kill his father and marry his mother. Not realizing he's adopted, he flees his hometown to avoid the horror. Cue cosmic laughter. On the road, he gets into a scuffle with an older man, Laius, and
kills him. Then he solves the riddle of the Sphinx, saves Thebes and marries the queen Jocasta, yes, his actual mother, and he becomes king. Honestly, no one in this story gets a happy ending. Eventually, the truth unfolds like a badly wrapped
birthday gift. Jocasta hangs herself. Oedipus blinds himself with her brooches. The gods, they just watch, amused and appalled. Mainstream historical fact time. Ancient Greeks took oracles very seriously. The oracle at Delphi was a real place where priestesses, often in a trance induced by natural gases, would deliver ambiguous prophecies that kings and generals used to make decisions. Real decisions. Real wars. But back to fate. The story of Oedipus isn't about avoiding destiny, it's about how trying too hard to dodge it just fast-tracks the whole disaster. This theme repeats like a cursed echo across Greek myth. Take Perseus, for example. His grandfather, Acrisius, gets a prophecy. His daughter's son will kill him. Naturally, he locks his daughter Danae in a tower. Logical, if creepy. Zeus, clearly having a thing for problematic architecture, visits Danae as a golden rain. Yes, rain. She gets pregnant. Perseus is born. Acrisius tries to offload the pair in a chest at sea. But the sea, apparently, is feeling generous. Perseus grows up, decapitates Medusa, we'll come back to that mess, rescues a princess, and becomes
a hero.
Then, at a sports event, he throws a discus and accidentally kills Acrisius in the crowd. Whoops! Historians still argue whether these fatalistic myths reflect a broader Greek worldview, one where free will is basically window dressing on a universe run by divine scripts. Are you choosing or just following the breadcrumb trail laid by the fates? You glide back toward that trail, this time to the story of Atreus and Thyestes, which, brace yourself, is peak dysfunctional family drama. Atreus and Thyestes are brothers in the cursed house of Atreus. Atreus discovers Thyestes is having an affair with his wife. So obviously he invites him to dinner and serves him his own sons. In a stew, Surprise, Thyestes swears revenge. He later fathers a son, Aegisthus, by his own daughter because the gods really needed more therapy fodder. That
Son grows up and helps Clytemnestra, remember her?
kill Agamemnon, Atreus' son, when he comes home from Troy. Are you dizzy yet? Good. Here's your quirky tidbit. The house of Atreus was so notorious that Roman playwrights later used it as the gold standard for tragedy. If you wanted something dramatic, bloody, and morally messy, you just said, make it Atreus-y. What ties all of this together? The sense that fate is a living force. Not just something that happens to you, but something that haunts you, passed down like a cursed heirloom from one generation to the next. You think again of Helen, of Zeus as a swan,
Of Paris and his golden apple. None of them thought they were lighting the fuse. They were just following the script, or were they? That's where myth gets deliciously blurry. Even as fate weaves its patterns, every character believes they're acting freely, that they have a choice.
that their pain is unique, and maybe it is. You now descend into the threadwork of the fates themselves, three sisters, eerie and ancient, spinning the thread of each mortal life. Clotho spins it, Lachesis measures it, Atropos snips it. There's no negotiation, no appeals process, just one long, delicate thread. Some versions say even Zeus can't override them. Others say he just pretends he can't. Typical. It's this tension between what you want and what's already written that gives Greek myths their peculiar insomnia. They aren't bedtime stories in the soft lullaby sense. They're bedtime stories the way dreams are, beautiful, chaotic, and tinged with dread. You've felt it, haven't you? Floating through Oedipus's horror. Watching Perseus stumble into the future. Tracing Helen's glance at a horizon she can't escape. You wonder if they knew. If some small part of them always sensed the script before the curtain even rose. You close in again on that moment of transformation. Zeus, feathers bright in moonlight, gliding toward Leda by the riverbank. Was he moved by fate? Or was this simply a god indulging a whim that would ripple for generations? Historians still debate the purpose of these myths, moral guides, cultural glue, or just entertainment for long evenings with too much wine. Maybe all of the above, maybe none. But one thing's clear, fate doesn't care what you believe. It doesn't even knock. It just opens the door, steps inside, and sits down like it owns the place, and maybe, just maybe, it does. You're back in the quiet after the storm, drifting through the deep-breathing shadows of post-myth Greece. The gods are still lounging on Olympus, but something feels changed. Less golden light, more dust in the corners. As if the myths themselves are exhaling, finally done spinning their endless yarns of passion and prophecy. But hold on, there's one more force you haven't fully explored yet, reputation. Because in this chaotic, god-ridden world, it's not just fate or family curses that dictate your legacy. It's what people say about you after you're gone. And in ancient Greece, myth and memory were basically the same thing. Take Heracles, more commonly known today as Hercules, thanks to Roman rebranding. He's strength personified, right? Bulging biceps, lion skin cape, casual feats like wrestling, death or holding up the sky while Atlas takes a snack break. But under all that muscle is a man who was manipulated, punished, and misunderstood. Let's peel back the layers. Born from another classic Zeus affair, Heracles is the son of Zeus and Alcmene. Hera, Zeus's actual wife, is not thrilled. In fact, she spends most of Heracles' life trying to ruin it. First, she sends snakes to his crib. Baby Heracles strangles them like they're rubber toys. Cute, if mildly traumatic. Later, in a fit of divine madness, courtesy of Hera, Heracles kills his wife and children. It's one of the darkest turns in any myth, and it's not even the climax. As penance, he's assigned the famous 12 labors, a series of totally not impossible tasks that would leave most people crying into a goatskin blanket. Let's roll through a few. Slay the Nemean lion. Done. With bare hands. Kill the Hydra. Heads keep growing back. He burns the stumps with a torch. Points for creativity. Clean the Augean stables. Mountains of divine poop. He reroutes a river. Engineers still nod approvingly. Capture the Erymanthian boar, the Ceryneian hind, the Stymphalian birds. Each one sounds like a minor video game boss. Heracles beats them all with brute strength and occasional trickery. Quirky tidbit. During one of his labors, he accidentally invents archery poison by dipping arrows into the Hydra's blood. Centaurs will not be thrilled about this later. His fame grows, but so does his loneliness. He becomes less of a man and more of a symbol of might, of suffering, of the strange way we admire people more once they're broken. Historians still argue whether Heracles was a purely Greek invention, or borrowed from earlier Mesopotamian or Anatolian figures. Similar strongman stories existed across the ancient world, each with their own flavor of tragedy. Eventually Heracles dies, not in battle, not from age, but from a poisoned robe given to him by his wife, Deianira, who believed it was a love charm. It burns him alive. No mortal could survive it. So Zeus makes him a god. Classic exit strategy. But let's switch gears. You float now through dusty amphorae and ancient scrolls toward another famous figure, Orpheus. You've heard his name, maybe in poetry, maybe in indie music, the original sad boy, a poet, a musician, a lover who walked into the underworld and nearly came out whole. Orpheus falls in love with Eurydice. She dies. Snakebite, instant heartbreak. He's so shattered, he descends into Hades to beg for her soul. With just a lyre and his voice, he moves the entire realm of the dead to tears. Even Hades is impressed. He allows Eurydice to return a life on one condition. Orpheus must walk ahead and not look back until they both reach the upper world. You already know what happens. With the sunlight just ahead, Orpheus turns. Maybe he thought she had stumbled. Maybe he couldn't bear the silence. Either way, she vanishes forever. No appeals, no redo for open scholarly debate time. Some versions say Orpheus was killed by Maenads, Bacchic worshippers enraged that he rejected other women after Eurydice. Others say he just withered away in grief. Either way, his head and lyre floated downriver, still singing. You shiver, because Orpheus reminds you, not every hero fights with a sword, and not every tragedy ends in fire and thunder. Sometimes it's just one bad decision, one glance too early. Now let's stroll through the quieter corners of Greek myth, characters whose names you maybe only heard once in a textbook, but whose stories ripple with strange, dreamy power. Like Pygmalion, a sculptor who fell in love with his own statue. He carved her so perfectly he couldn't bear that she wasn't real. Aphrodite, in a rare act of kindness, brought the statue to life. It's one of the rare happy endings, though if you squint, it's still wildly unsettling. Falling in love. with someone you created? Let's just say modern therapists would have thoughts. Or Narcissus, the boy so beautiful he fell in love with his reflection. He wasted away staring at it, unable to look away. Where he died, a flower grew, the Narcissus, of course. Some myths whisper rather than shout, but they all share one trait, the belief that beauty and pain are never far apart, that love, even the deep, dreamy kind, always has teeth. You glance up, time's thread is twisting again. Back to the big names, Achilles sitting beside Patroclus's tomb, refusing food, grieving deeper than the sea. His rage carved history, but his sorrow made him myth. Penelope at her loom, still unraveling at night, even though her husband's home now. Habit is hard to break, and Zeus, still lounging in Olympus, he's probably halfway into another shape-shifting stunt by now. Hawk, cloud, bull, you name it. You wonder what he's really chasing. Love, power, distraction, you'll never know. That's the trick of mythology. The closer you get, the more it slips away, like sand through your fingers or dreams fading in daylight. But still you chase it, because deep down, we all want to believe that somewhere, in some golden past, just beyond memory, the gods were real and the world shimmered with stories that could shape the future, and maybe, just maybe, they still do. You hover now at the edge of a dusky cliff, suspended in a space where stories are more real than the stones beneath your feet. The myths have carried you through tragedy, transformation, love, and fate. But let's not forget that in Greece, old school, olive oil slick, toga tied, Greece, your reputation could outlive your bones. Legacy wasn't a maybe. It was the whole game. So let's talk about that most elusive of mythic currencies. Immortality through memory. You drift toward the figure of
Sisyphus. Yes, that's Sisyphus.
the guy condemned to push a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down every single time. Over and over, forever. Why? Well, Sisyphus was clever, too clever. He tricked the gods not once, but twice. First, he ratted out Zeus for kidnapping a river god's daughter. That's a major no-no in Mount Olympus HR. Later, he even cheated death by convincing Thanatos, the god of death himself, to try on some magical handcuffs. That worked about as well as you'd think. While Thanatos was restrained, no one could die. Battles turned into slap fights. Old age just paused. The world tilted sideways. Eventually, Ares, god of war, and not exactly known for patience, freed Thanatos and dragged Sisyphus kicking and screaming back to the underworld. His punishment? That eternal hill. Historians still debate whether Sisyphus's story is a warning against pride or a poetic metaphor for human struggle. Philosophers like Camus later rebranded him as a symbol of perseverance. Imagine that, an ancient Greek cautionary tale turned existential icon. Not bad for a guy with serious boulder issues, but here's the weird part. Sisyphus wanted to matter. He wanted to outwit death. And in a very real way, he did. Thousands of years later, we're still talking about him. You drift sideways now toward
Another mythic trickster, Prometheus. Now, Prometheus wasn't your average meddler. He was a titan, one of the old gods. And unlike many of his kin, he liked humans, which is kind of touching, or possibly suspicious. He gave them fire, not metaphorical.
fire, literal flame. Up until that point, humans were cold, clueless, and mostly trying not to be eaten. Fire changed everything. Cooked food, warmth, tools, society, possibly marshmallows. Zeus? Not pleased. Fire was supposed to be divine only, part of that gods have it better hierarchy. Prometheus had crossed a line, so Zeus chained him to a rock and sent an eagle to eat his liver every day. It would grow back at night because, eternal torment, quirky detail. The ancient Greeks were weirdly obsessed with the liver. They thought it was the seat of emotion and vitality, so having it eaten daily wasn't just gross, it was deeply symbolic. Pain in the place where your soul lives. But even chained, even bleeding, Prometheus didn't regret it. He'd given humanity a spark. That mattered more than comfort. Modern thinkers still wrangle with what Prometheus represents: hope, rebellion, science, defiance. He's a mythic multi-tool, and like Sisyphus, he's remembered. You're starting to see a pattern, aren't you? These aren't just cautionary tales, they're blueprints, or maybe eulogies for people who lived too loudly, loved too hard, tried too much. Now follow that thought right into the myth of Icarus. Young Icarus and his father Daedalus are imprisoned on Crete by King Minos. Daedalus, an inventor, builds wings from feathers and wax. A prison break in style, he warns Icarus not to fly too high. The sun will melt the wax. Not too low, the sea spray will soak the feathers. Icarus nods.
Sure, of course. And then he flies. He really flies, up and up, drunk on the wind, laughing like a mad poet.
Until the wax softens, the feathers scatter, and he plummets. Daedalus watches from below as his son becomes a smudge on the ocean. Historians still argue whether the myth is about hubris or youthful recklessness, or whether it's something deeper, a fear of being ordinary, of never even trying to soar. You feel that, don't you? Even in dreams, there's a part of you that wants to touch the sun. Just once, and while we're unpacking emotion, let's give a nod to Niobe. Niobe was a queen, with many children, 6, sometimes 14, depending on who's telling it. She boasted that she was better than Leto, the goddess with only 2 kids, Apollo and Artemis. Classic mistake. Apollo and Artemis, being gods with serious sibling loyalty, killed all Niobe's children, everyone. Some versions let 1 or 2 survive, but the damage is done. Niobe flees to a mountain, turns to stone from grief, and her rocky form continues to weep. Even now, travelers in Turkey claim to see her tears trickling down the cliffside. That's your quirky tidbit in Greek. Mythology, grief doesn't end. It petrifies. It becomes landscape. And it's remembered. You're probably sensing the theme by now. In this mythic universe, death isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Being forgotten is. Zeus's many forms. Swan, bull, shower of gold. They weren't just tricks. They were moves in a bigger game. He wanted to leave an imprint, not just on women or kingdoms, but on stories, on time itself. Even minor characters, the girl turned into a spider, Arachne, the boy who drowned and became a flower, Hyacinthus, the man who insulted Dionysus and ended up a dolphin, no, really, all find themselves woven into the fabric of collective memory. They were punished, yes, but also preserved. So when you think about Zeus turning into a swan for Leda, sparking the Helen saga, igniting a war, it wasn't just for love or lust, it was maybe for legacy. Historians still debate whether Greek myths were designed to encode moral values or just explain the weird stuff like why spiders exist or why the sun rises. But they all agree on one thing: these stories were never meant to disappear. Neither were you. You close your eyes in the story night, floating among gods and mortals who refused to be quiet, who etched their names into marble, stars, and sleep, not because they were perfect, but because they were remembered. You're gliding now through the soft velvet air of twilight myth, neither day nor night, neither truth nor tale. Just this warm, slow swirl of memory, myth and mischief that refuses to settle. And as your feet no longer touch the ground, you begin to realize something. Even the gods, immortal, radiant, reality-bending, crave something deeply human. Attention. Yep. At their shimmering core, these thunder-hurling, love-transforming deities are surprisingly needy. Zeus with his swan costumes, Hera with her long grudges, Poseidon turning horses into waves just to make a point. It's all theatre, and you, drifting through these stories, are the audience they always wanted. You pass Poseidon now. Let's not leave him behind without a quick dip in the sea. Poseidon, god of the oceans, earthquakes and horses, yes, that's a package deal, was both majestic and moody. His trident could split mountains and silence islands, but he was also the patron of sailors, and they offered him horses by drowning them in the surf. Bit of a mixed message, if we're being honest. Mainstream fact. The Temple of Poseidon at Cape Sunion still stands, its white marble columns high on a cliff above the sea. Sailors used to glimpse it from their ships and feel just a little braver. But Poseidon's legacy is soaked in rivalry. Remember Athens? That city wasn't his first choice. See, both Poseidon and Athena wanted to be the patron deity of this shining new metropolis. They each had to offer a gift to the city's people. Poseidon slammed his trident into the earth and, depending
on the version, either a spring of seawater or a warhorse emerged. Athena, calm and clever, planted the olive tree. Practical, lasts longer.
tastes better. Athena won. Historians still argue whether this myth reflects a real shift from warlike traditions to more agricultural and civic-focused society. Either way, Poseidon never quite forgave the city. Athens would face earthquakes and floods often enough to suspect he was still holding a grudge. You float past another figure, one who doesn't get enough love, Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, literally the fire in the center of the home. She didn't chase lovers or start wars, she stayed. In a world of flying sandals and love triangles, Hestia kept the flame burning. Every Greek home had a fire for her. Every public hearth was sacred. To her, fringe detail, Hestia is one of the few Olympians who gave up her throne. When Dionysus, god of wine, drama, and oops, I joined a cult, wanted in, she stepped aside. No power struggle, no lightning bolts, just, sure, let him have my seat. That quiet strength made her invisible in myths, but vital in life. You don't write epics about staying home and keeping everyone alive through winter. But without it, no heroes survive the journey. And now, speaking of journeys, let's check in on Odysseus again. You remember him, that tired man with the sea in his eyes, the one who took 10 years to get home after the Trojan War, after dodging cyclopes and enchantresses, after whispering his name to a cave full of monsters and turning down immortality from Calypso, or maybe just getting bored. Odysseus finally makes it back to Ithaca. But home isn't simple. His wife, Penelope, has been fending off suitors by weaving and unweaving the same funeral shroud for years. His son, Telemachus, has grown. His palace is filled with freeloaders, and so Odysseus doesn't just stroll in. No, he dresses as a beggar, strings his old bow, and unleashes a dramatic revenge scene that would make any Netflix series jealous. Mainstream. Fact? The bow contest where only Odysseus can string his weapon is probably an ancient nod to kingship being tied to divine strength. If you could do what no one else could, the gods had clearly chosen you. But scholars still debate whether the end of the Odyssey is triumphant or deeply unsettling. Odysseus comes home changed, traumatized, distrustful. The sea still echoes inside him. You drift higher now, past the mortal coil, into the realm where myths touch the stars. Literally, constellations. So many of the Greek tales ended with someone being tossed skyward. It was the gods' way of saying, hey, sorry for the trauma, enjoy being a decorative dot. Orion, the great hunter, killed by a giant scorpion. Now both chase each other across the sky. Cassiopeia, queen of vanity, punished by being pinned to the heavens in a chair that flips upside down. Andromeda, rescued by Perseus, placed among the stars next to a sea monster. Even Zeus's lovers, Callisto the bear, Europa the bull, become constellations, a kind of glittery guilt bouquet. The Greeks looked up and saw their entire mythology mapped out above them. The night sky wasn't just stars, it was memory, tragedy, warning. And now, you're seeing it too. You float among the stars. You can almost reach out and touch the tail of the scorpion, the curved arc of the lyre, the lion's mane of Leo. You remember how it all started. Zeus, a swan, a queen, and a bad idea that led to Helen of Troy. That single moment spiraled into generations of war, mourning, heroism, and poetry, and none of it would have mattered
if no one told the story. That's the point of all this, isn't it? Not the shape-shifting, not the curses, not even the heroics. It's the telling, the remembering. Because long after the gods stop throwing lightning bolts and heroes hang up
their sandals, someone, maybe you, maybe me, whispers the names again, and the myth breathes, lives, grows wings like a swan. You're weightless now, drifting through memory and myth as if they're mist curled around your ankles. The stories no longer start or stop. They simply continue, looping through the ages like song lyrics half remembered, but sung with conviction. Anyway, and here comes one more verse, one more strange, shining tale to fold into your dream. The birth of Dionysus. If Zeus is the face of thunder and ego, and Athena is reason made divine, then Dionysus, he's chaos with a grape-stained grin. He's the god of wine, theatre, madness, transformation, and ecstatic release. Basically, the embodiment of that moment right before you dance on a table, or regret it. And how he was born? Yeah, it's weird. Zeus fell in love again with a mortal woman named Semele. Hera, in her usual jealous fury, tricked Semele into
asking Zeus to show himself in his full godly form. You know how this goes. Zeus, bound by divine law, had to oblige.
He showed up in his true nature, flashes of lightning, the full cosmic horror show. Semele evaporated instantly, but Zeus snatched their unborn baby from the ashes and sewed him into his own thigh. That's right, his thigh. And months later he gave birth through that same thigh. Quirky, beyond. But Dionysus was no ordinary god. He was twice born, part mortal, part divine, raised among mountain nymphs, often depicted as gender-fluid, wild-haired, eyes a little too wide. He led parades
of maenads, frenzied women tearing through the forests in ecstatic rituals.
He inspired theatre, blurred boundaries, cracked open polite society, not evil, just inconvenient to order. mainstream fact. The ancient festival of Dionysia in Athens is considered the birthplace of Western theatre. Playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides competed during multi-day feasts in his honor, and the whole city attended. Historians still argue whether Dionysus represents liberation or dangerous frenzy, whether his presence brings enlightenment or collapse, maybe both. That's the thing about wine and myth. The first sip is joy, the last drop is chaos. And yet you like Dionysus, not just because he parties, though bonus, but because he cares about humans. He offers transcendence, even if it's messy. He invites everyone, not just kings or warriors, just come as you are. Now shift again. Glide through time like a candle's smoke curling along the rafters. Another figure waits for you. Medusa, her name alone ripples through you, doesn't it? The woman with snakes for hair. The one whose gaze turned men to stone. But what's the real story? She wasn't always a monster. Medusa was once a beautiful mortal priestess of Athena. But when Poseidon assaulted her inside Athena's temple, yes, assaulted, Athena punished Medusa, not him. She transformed her into a gorgon, monstrous, fearsome, untouchable. Now let's pause there, because even in ancient times that felt off, unfair. Historians still debate whether Medusa's story was a cautionary tale about female autonomy, or a myth retold too many times through frightened male eyes. But one fringe take? Some scholars believe Medusa wasn't cursed, but protected. Athena made her terrifying so no one could ever hurt her again. That hits different, doesn't it? Eventually Perseus beheads Medusa with the help of divine tools. Hermes' winged sandals, Hades' invisibility helm, Athena's mirrored shield.
A full God-sponsored operation. Yet even in death she remains powerful. Her head becomes a weapon. Her blood births the winged horse Pegasus. You hear that? Her blood made Pegasus. She wasn't a footnote, she was the turning point. Now hover back, watching these stories wrap around each other like ivy on old stone. And here come the Muses, 9 daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, goddess of memory. Each one governs an art, epic poetry, music, history, comedy, tragedy, dance, even astronomy. They're the real architects of legacy. Not warriors or kings, not monsters or gods. The ones who tell the stories. Because what's myth without memory? What's love or tragedy if no one sings about it afterward? And their mother, Mnemosyne, might be the most important goddess you've never heard of. She didn't wield a spear, she didn't seduce or transform, she just remembered. That's how myths survived. That's how names linger in the corners of dreams, long after the temples have crumbled. Quirky detail. The ancient Greeks believed memory was so essential that in the underworld you had 2 water sources. One was the river Lethe, drink from it and forget everything. The other, rarer, was the spring of Mnemosyne. Drink from that, and remember who you really are. The choice wasn't between heaven and hell. It was between forgetting and remembering now. Which would you choose? You begin to drift downward, slowly as if pulled by gravity or story fatigue. But before we reach the final thread, let's revisit where we began. Zeus, gliding through moonlight as a swan. Still weird, yes. Still a deeply questionable move, but it wasn't random. It was intentional myth-making. The swan is beautiful, graceful, fragile seeming. It hides power in elegance. The Greeks loved that tension.
The idea that something delicate could be deadly, that love could lead to war, that beauty could change history. The swan begat Helen. Helen begat the Trojan War. And from that war came Achilles, Odysseus, Cassandra, Aeneas, the backbone of all Western epic. So when Zeus transformed, maybe it wasn't just seduction, maybe it was chess, maybe it was poetry in disguise. Historians still puzzle over why swans recur in mythologies from India to Scandinavia. Divine messengers, liminal beings, guardians of thresholds. Maybe Zeus knew what he was doing after all. Maybe, or maybe he just really liked feathers. Either way, you've come a long way from that first moonlit lake, haven't you? And now you coast along the last ridge of myth, where the sky feels heavy with dreams and the gods, once thunderous and wild, whisper instead of roar. Their stories soften as if even they know you're almost asleep. Your limbs feel like marble, cool, weighty, timeless. You land gently in a grove at dusk. Olive trees sway with silver-tipped leaves. A breeze stirs the grass like an old memory. This, you realize, is the place where myths come to rest. And here, under the quiet shade, sit Heracles, yes, that Heracles, or as you may know him by his Roman name, Hercules.
Muscle-bound, lion-wearing, 12-labor-enduring, absurdly heroic Heracles. But this isn't the shouting, club-swinging version. This is Heracles at the end. The labors are over. The monsters are all slain or tamed. The gods have offered him a place on Olympus. And for the first time, he looks tired. You sit beside him. He doesn't speak. He just nods as if to say, "You made it." See, Heracles wasn't just brawn. He was suffering made divine.
Each labor he performed was punishment for a moment of madness inflicted by Hera. He killed his family in a frenzy, not out of cruelty, but cursed blindness. And afterward, he did what few heroes ever do. He took responsibility. Mainstream fact? The 12 labors weren't just epic side quests, they were acts of purification. Redemption, ancient Greek style, wrestle a lion, clean 1,000 stables, capture the golden hind, go get the apples of the Hesperides. Oh, and by the way, steal Cerberus from the underworld. But here's something quirky, those stables, the Augean stables, he cleaned them by rerouting a river, a literal flex, the original life hack. Historians still argue whether Heracles was originally a hero or a fertility god. In older versions of myth, he's tied not to conquest but to cycles, harvests, pain and renewal, death and return. So maybe it makes sense that after all the roaring, smashing and sacrificing, he gets to rest, and so do you. Nearby, the fates begin to weave. You've seen them before. 3 old women sitting at the edge of the world, spinning the threads of every mortal life. Clotho spins, Lachesis measures, Atropos cuts. They never speak, never stop. They just work. But tonight they pause just for a moment. They look at your thread, not judging, not deciding, just admiring the texture. You've been through a
lot after all. Zeus and swans, Trojan War, wine-soaked forests, beheaded monsters, talking horses. You haven't just heard a story. You became part of one. Now drift toward the edge of the garden. There, under an archway of cypress trees, stands
Orpheus, the man who sang his way into the underworld. You remember him, the poet who made Hades cry, who turned back at the last moment and lost everything. He's playing softly now, no words, just melody. It sounds like memory. It sounds like a lullaby older than cities, and this time he doesn't look back, he just plays you out. You begin to forget where one story ends and another begins, Were you Helen, watching ships burn for your beauty? Were you Medusa, whispering stone into silence? Were you Dionysus, dancing at the edge of sense? Or maybe you were simply the listener, the dreamer, which, let's be honest, is the most powerful role of all. Because without you, the myths disappear. You blink up. The sky above is a vast scroll of constellations, each one a character you've met. A Linnaeus written in starlight. Swan, lyre, lion, hunter, hero. And in the center, a thread. Yours. It stretches gently, glowing faintly, not yet cut. Still spinning, still dreaming, still here, and now let everything fade. No more gods, no more thunder, no more labors or wars or questions without answers. Just you, soft breath, heavy limbs, a slow unraveling of thought. The myths have curled up into the corners of your room now, shrinking small like shadows at dawn. They're not gone, just resting as you are. You might still hear the rustle of wings, the distant hum of lyres, a whisper of salt wind from the shores of Troy. But these sounds are gentler now, fainter. You're lying in your own story again. It doesn't matter what time it is or where you are in the world. The gods don't care about clocks. Sleep is sacred whether it comes in the mountains of Greece or the backseat of a night bus in Kansas. The stories will wait for you. They always do. You've wandered far tonight, through golden halls and dark forests, past laughing satyrs and stone-eyed gorgons. You've touched myth and been touched by it in return, but now it's time to drift, sink, float, fall. The fates have set down their shears. Even the swan has folded its wings. No more battles, no more riddles, just rest. Breathe in, long and slow. Exhale. Again, again. That's all. Sleep well, dream softly, and thank you for coming along.